Welcome, Namaste, Shalom. Today we are in for a real treat. We are very fortunate to have with us two very special spiritual mentors. Deepak Chopra, MD, is an internationally renowned doctor, author of 80 books, and spiritual entrepreneur who has had a profound influence on the world to rethink the principles of wellness and draws freely on the Eastern spiritual traditions. Rabbi Laibl Wolf is a world-acclaimed lecturer and spiritual mentor who has single-handedly shaped the ancient wisdoms of Kabbalah and Torah into a guide for transforming mental attitudes, emotion postures, and mind-body health. My name is Jennifer Smorgon, and I have the honor of calling Rabbi Wolf my teacher and friend. And I am also honored to be a director on the Chopra Foundation Board, working with Deepak Chopra to help raise the level of consciousness around the world through wellness practices. Let me begin by asking Deepak. Deepak, the world is not in great shape, as the headlines keep reminding us. How can we make the world a better place?
The world is a projection of our collective consciousness. I personally do not believe in any form of activism because I find that most activists are outraged, morally outraged, and even though moral outrage seems to be justified, it's rage. And it adds to the turbulence of the collective mind of consciousness as a field. So the only way we can help change the world is to be the change ourselves. And if there's a critical mass of people who move in the direction of peace within themselves, then the world will transform. Is that going to happen? I don't know. Only the mysterious unknown knows. There are all kinds of forces that play in the universe. Evolution, inertia, what we call good and evil. And our only effort can be to be the change we want to see, and then do everything with impeccability and authenticity, and then leave the results to the unknown.
Beautiful. And Laibl?
I can only echo what Deepak said. I think that basically changes begin from within here. I suppose there's a horizontal plane, a plane whereby the way I comport myself and the way that I exemplify myself leaves a residual effect on those around me. And that continues as a multiplier effect outwards, like a pebble that's dropped into the pond and the waves go to the distant shores. So I do affect the world horizontally. But within the Jewish spiritual tradition, there's also a vertical dimension. Each one of us is connected to the one common source. And that one common source is like strings, and every soul, every individual is one part connected to that whole. So if I am able to, at the same time, become that projection onto the screen of time and space, that's who we are, at the same time, I can go back to the projector and allow my effect to affect everybody in the world at the same time. So you've got two dimensions of it. The dimension which is a cause and effect dimension, we, the people around us, family, community and onwards, making changes, and then creating changes from our spiritual source, which goes to the furthest points of the world as well. So I'm very much in sync with what Deepak was saying.
Thank you. Laibl, you train people to balance the mind and emotion. How do you balance being a spiritual person and living in a material world?
Well, a difficult question. The point being, I suppose, since you mentioned mind and emotion, when I was completing my master's in psychology, I concluded that from all the texts that I had been instructed to read, the one arena where there was mutual exclusivity, non-agreement, was what is emotion. Emotion was always defined in terms of feeling, which is just a synonym. Or if I ask an audience, what is emotion? They'll say it's a response. So I say, is it a mechanical response? Is it a nuclear response? Is it an electrostatic response? Response doesn't have it either. In our teachings, there are two consciousness flows. One is mind consciousness, and the other one is emotion consciousness. And these are the two parallel pathways that generally we reach out into the world. And of course, very often what we find is we describe people, oh, that's an emotional person, or that's a very cerebral individual, or whatever might be the case. But the truth is, the relationship is as follows. Mind comes first, and emotions follow. Now, it might be that my moment of mind was microscopic in size. Maybe it was just a split second. That's called my interpretation. Someone's yelling at me. I interpret that as negative. I come out with negativity as a consequence because my emotions are out of fear or self-defense. But what if I was able to master my emotions? What if I was able to have the paradigm shift of changing my interpretation? They're yelling at me. Why? Because they're in pain. I may not know why. Otherwise, people don't go around yelling unless there's emotional pain or physical pain. What can I do to help them instead of mimicking them and yelling back at them?
I love that. You're getting information, recognizing somebody else's state of consciousness in a particular moment, really having nothing to do with you.
Other centeredness. In other words, the term of reference isn't all about me, ego, 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 but it's moving to a position of looking at the thou, at the otherness, at the you. So coming back to your basic question, living a spiritual life perhaps in a material world, materiality is really an extension of spirituality. It's all on the one plane. You would say that the physical world is the most heavy, finite element of spirituality, but it's still connected to spirituality as such. So we are in the same vibe. The higher self has to come to the fore, and the material world will change.
Deepak, how do you balance your life?
Well, first of all, I want to comment on what was just said. And, there are only two fundamental kind of emotions that we have. And very much in alignment with what the rabbi said. Emotions that connect us with each other, like love, compassion, empathy, equanimity. And emotions that disconnect us, like hostility, anger, resentment, grievances, guilt, shame, depression. So where do we want to be? We want to be connected because, as he said, we have a common source. So those emotions that connect us to life also connect us to source. That's why emotions like love, kindness, joy, equanimity, empathy, compassion are considered divine. And so in my case, I always ask myself, stop for a moment and say, am I connecting myself to life, or am I cutting off life energy? So that's how I balance that part. The rest is I make a commitment every day to a joyful, energetic body, loving, compassionate heart, restful, reflective mind, and most importantly, lightness of soul, of being, which means go with the flow.
And the practices that you have in your life to
I have
that
practices
flow?
I spend every day, a couple of hours in stillness and meditation, reflection. I also have a yoga practice, and I make sure I move.
Right.
I try not to put toxins in my body, but I'm easy about it.
Thank you.
The two terms that Deepak mentioned, commitment and connectedness. And it's interesting because in our tradition, connectedness is almost the primary motivation factor in life. What we seek is to connect two disparate elements, whether it's be people, and we call that love, the area of connectedness, or whether it's knowledge, it's to know something and connect to it. And the secret lies in commitment. Love continues to flourish if there's that profundity of commitment. The knowledge continues to grow if there's that profundity of commitment. So I totally agree with that.
Can religions coexist, or are they doomed to rivalry and even wars? Laibl?
The word religions is it has a certain historical common understanding, but when I was completing my law studies, it became very clear that a legalistic definition of a phenomenon is different than sometimes a theological or philosophical one. What is a religion? And are religions the curse that creates the antipathies amongst people because of nationalistic and belongings to I am right groups type of thing? I prefer not to talk about religion per se. I think that more importantly is to have a belonging to a group that practices morality, ethics, inclusiveness, a sense of non-exclusiveness, a sense of compassion, empathy, the words that Deepak used. Now, if that group has a theological construct and we call it a religion, I will then define that perhaps as one that is positive. Unfortunately, in the world, there are groups of people that sometimes coagulate and come together in groupings where there is not where there is exclusivity in the sense of dominance, wishing to be the interpreter of the other person's life and forcing it down their throat. They also are called religions, but they may not be what Western society and Eastern society today would be most desirous of. So the short answer is, I think it's got to do with the psychology and the consequent sociology more than the theological religion per se. Religions, it's what you make of it.
Deepak, do you have any comments?
I first of all totally agree with what the rabbi said just now. I think we confuse very frequently religious experience with religious dogma. People are psychologically and spiritually and emotionally in all kinds of stages of development. So it's very difficult to judge people's behavior, not knowing where they are in their personal growth. Mm-hmm. The religious experience, though, is common to all religions, which is an experience of transcendence, of unity consciousness, the emergence of Platonic values like truth, goodness, beauty, harmony, love, peace, compassion, joy, inspiration, the loss of the fear of death because you've touched something that's timeless, eternal, transcendent. That's how we see or experience the religious connection to our soul, spirit, God, Ein Sof, the mystery, whatever. Now, then we construct culturally labels around that and rules and regulations, which are meant to actually create solidarity and union and ethics and morality. But if you're too narrow-minded in that, then you become dogmatic. My version is better than yours. And then we go fight wars around ideology, which gets, of course, mixed up with ethnocentrism, sometimes racism and bigotry.
You know what they say?
Prejudice.
Never judge a religion by the people that practice it, because there's personality conflict involved.
Well, if somebody is pointing to the moon, you want to look at the moon, not worship the finger.
Right.
We have discovered the enemy, and the enemy is us. It could be such a wonderful, cohesive force for oneness, and yet because the ego gets in the way, we start to build individual-centered approaches to life rather than all-centered approaches to life.
Sure. So people today are bombarded by conflicting information on what makes them sick and what makes them healthy. If both of you were to give one piece of advice today to maintain wellness, what would that be? Deepak?
Well, of course, there's a lot of information out there. My personal experience, there are only 5 or 6 things that are really, really important. Sleep is one of them. Okay, most people are not getting normal, restful sleep because they put toxins in their body, sleeping pills, tranquilizers, alcohol, etc. So sleep, number one. For me, meditation It could be prayer, it could be meditation, reflection, contemplation, number 2. 3 is movement. 4 is food that is not manufactured, processed, refined, contaminated with antibiotics and steroids, which is unfortunately the case these days. 5, and probably the most important, emotional well-being, as I said before, cultivating divine emotions like loving kindness, joy, compassion, empathy, peace. And that's about it, really.
Pretty good list. Laibl?
I can't tackle it from the knowledge vantage point that obviously Deepak has spent his life dedicating himself to. But one of the things I've discovered in my shortness of time in this reincarnation is that one's attitudinal response to life has such an important bearing on the physical integrity of our being. I mean, we are a absolutely dynamic coagulation of molecules and electrons in a constant state of motion, and it's a bit like consciousness surfs the waves of our who we are. I have a son who lives in the West Coast in LA, and he enjoys surfing. He loves surfing, and I sometimes watch him going out and paddling tentatively out towards the waves, and then he adjudges a certain wave as being the one that he can enter into sync with. And he rises with dexterity onto his feet and moves up and down the board, and then he comes into a state of oneness with the wave, and he's able to ride the wave to shore. Now, to me, that's a metaphor of life, and it's also a metaphor of who we are, to be able to ride that wave to shore. Attitude is our surfboard. I know that Deepak writes, and I was always terribly impressed by the fact that the brain isn't just here, the brain is in every cell of the body. And therefore, if we can emote positively, develop a positive attitudinal response to challenge, inevitably that must somehow integrate into the physical wellness of the body as such. And I guess that's why the statistics that doctors with good bedside manners tend to have much better results from their patients as such. Or even sometimes you have even the fantastic stories of cancer remission circumstances through perhaps laughing, but certainly positivity and the like. But just, I guess my anecdotal experience of life is that positive attitude somehow relates very well to good health, and negative attitude relates perhaps to ill health. I notice statistics on anger. People who are angry by nature tend to get sicker more often. So if there's one thing that I would perhaps like to add to the discussion would be attitudinal response to life itself.
I should respond to that.
Please.
Because the surf analogy is beautiful. You know, I like to think of stress as like that wave. If you're not prepared, then every wave is a disaster. And if you know how to ride the wave, then it's joy, every one of them. Now, the attitude idea also that, you know, today there's a new science called epigenetics, which means that your presence, your behavior, even your speech, and your emotional makeup influence the genes of people around you.
Amazing.
You trigger genetic activity in their brain, which ultimately translates everywhere. So, you know, thinking about that, I was wondering how many people must have actually had genetic activity modified by Nelson Mandela, or Mother Teresa, or Dalai Lama, or
Deepak Chopra and Rabbi Laibl Wolf.
But, you know, that's why they say in the presence of someone who's holy or who has a connection to that which is sacred, you feel better. And now we have a biological explanation for that.
There's a wonderful teaching of the Friedrich Rebbe, one of the masters, who echoes that and says, almost verbatim, think a positive thought of someone across the other side of the globe, and you don't only alter them spiritually, but you alter them even with their material goodness.
We can now actually prove that. You can send life-enhancing emotion or an emoticon to somebody as a text message or as a tweet, and you can change millions of people's biology.
I love you. You just say I love you to somebody, right?
Absolutely.
Right. So with the global stress epidemic that's going on in the world, what advice can you offer this next generation that is dealing with information overload and not able to find that balance in their daily lives?
I think the best way to be happy is to make someone else happy. And it's quite simple. I think of it as 3 A's: attention, affection, appreciation. So be a good listener is attention. Notice good things about other people and acknowledge them authentically. That's appreciation. And affection simply means that you care.
And Laibl?
I guess the question is one of happiness as such. I recall in my somewhat younger years reading a book called Motorcycle
Racing.
Motorcycle and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. That's what it's called, by Robert Pirsig. And therein he has a wonderful piece of imagery on an occasion when he went with a group of elderly monks mountain climbing. Well, they were going to a particular mountain. It took some days. And he recalls always looking at the distance that the mountain is away and how much more toil and effort has to go into the journey as such. And he found himself tired out constantly, whereas the colleague monks that he was with, who were twice his age, were not only unfazed by the journey and seemed to be very much full of energy as such, but they were actually very happy in the journey itself.
Sure.
And he concludes at the end, of course, the well-known maxim that happiness is the journey and not the destination as such. Because happiness is the pot of gold at the end of a rainbow. The closer you get to it, the further away it recedes. Happiness isn't a thing. Happiness is the verb, the process, the journeying as such. To be able to achieve that state of happiness, you have to be able to have that positive disposition to the journey. And if I might add just one more thought, it occurs to me that can become habitual one way or the other. You can become habitually happy or habitually unhappy. Especially I'm impressed by the notion of the plastic brain, how we actually are able by repetitive adoption of postures in life, even intentionally, reformulate the way that the neurotransmitter processes take place. So to be happy, what you have to do is create a positive attitude to life. And the creation of a positive attitude is always to know the following. There is meaning in everything that occurs. Nothing is meaningless. And you have to be the student to the good teacher of life.
Thank you. Deepak, you're working on a wonderful initiative called the Self-Directed Biological Transformation Initiative. That's a mouthful. SBTI. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it started with a simple study that we did. We convinced a Nobel laureate biologist, Elizabeth Blackburn, and her team to look at the enzyme telomerase in people who are practicing meditation. Telomerase is an enzyme that controls the length of your chromosomes, your genome. As we get older, levels of the enzyme fall, and the genome, the chromosome, the buttons at the end of the chromosome, which are called telomeres, they shorten. When they get to a certain length, short length, then the whole chromosome falls apart, it stops replicating, cells stop replicating. That's the onset of physical death. So to our surprise, maybe not to our surprise, but the surprise of the biologists, the enzyme went up 40% in 4 days of meditation experience. Of course, people were on a retreat, so it was pretty intense, the meditation experience itself. This inspired us to relook at epigenetics And one of the things that's come out in this conversation is it's not really the experience that is processed in your consciousness, also in your brain, it's how you interpret the experience. So your interpretation of experience actually creates a biological response. So we mentioned, you say, I love you to someone, and it comes from an authentic place, then the brain secretes oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, opiates. These are all so-called happy molecules, and they fine-tune to the immune system also. They're immunomodulators. But let's say you're saying I love you as a manipulation to someone that you want to control, and they sense that. The same words, right? But there's a different interpretation of that. You don't make oxytocin, you make adrenaline and cortisol, which has the opposite effect. So every experience that we have is actually an interpretation, it's an attitude, he said. So how we experience life, and that includes speech, it includes behavior, it includes daily practices, movement, exercise, food, etc. But most importantly, emotions actually triggers a biological response through either activating the good genes, and when I say good genes, it means those that cause self-regulation and homeostasis, and downgrading the so-called bad genes, which cause inflammation. Now, theoretically, of course, even inflammation is a protective response. If I fall down, it's the inflammatory response that protects me from bleeding to death. So inflammation and homeostasis both protect us. But these days, in our world, there's too much inflammation. Inflammatory emotions, anger, hostility, retribution, vengeance, all of that. And there's physical inflammation in the form of toxins everywhere. Toxic food, toxic environments, toxic relationships, toxic emotions, all increase inflammation in the body. There is now compelling research that shows that too much inflammation causes, directly or indirectly, it predisposes us not only to heart attacks and cardiovascular illness, but also many types of cancer, autoimmune illnesses and infections. It's the background. Now here's something even more interesting. If you treat somebody aggressively, say they have cancer, and you give them more chemotherapy than is necessary, or many times it's not indicated and you give them chemotherapy, well, you kill the cancer cells, but you also cause collateral damage. You cause inflammation around the cells. And what happens, very interestingly, is that the cancer cells recruit the innocent cells to join them. They become terrorists. It's like you drop a bomb in Afghanistan and the intention is to kill a terrorist, but there's a wedding going on and innocent people are killed, then those innocent people are recruited by the terrorists to join them. So what this data is beginning to show is that the best way to improve any situation, whether it's physical or social, is to increase people's capacity for health and happiness. Even your enemies, the best way to get rid of your enemies is to increase their capacity for health and well-being and happiness. SBTI is the first attempt to show that through habits of thinking, feeling, behavior, even speaking, and daily routines of meditation and activity, yoga and breathing, exercises, can actually change the very behavior of your genes in the direction of health and happiness. This is the first step. But as Rudy Tanzi, who's my collaborator in the study, among others, he says the next step is to show that this change affects future generations. which is amazing. And the early data is already showing that in mice that are fearful because of some situation that was induced in them, the next 2 generations of mice will behave in a fearful manner. So it's exciting.
And isn't it interesting that there is the complexity of the psychomedico dynamics that we're actually witnessing and is being researched, but it all goes back to a very simple proposition, and that each one of us has that free choice to choose to interpret positively. Now, there's a 50-50 chance we're right, 50-50 chance we're wrong.
Yeah.
But if you axiomatically choose 50% positive, you get a lot of byproducts, as we heard. Good health, wellness, the world becomes better. So just choose positive. Tracht gut und werdet sein gut is the Yiddish axiom. Think positive and the outcomes were positive.
There you are.
Well, I could spend all day listening to these 2 very wise and gifted teachers and spiritual leaders. Perhaps we can continue this conversation at a later time. Thank you so much for coming. Deepak, Laibl, thank you.
So much.
Well, interesting. Well, I come from a Jewish background, though I've studied Eastern traditions as well. And I always felt that Judaism invented mindfulness because we take everything physical and elevate it to a spiritual level to have an appreciation of things. You know, before you drink a glass of water, you make a bracha, you make a blessing over the water. Before you eat something, you shouldn't eat an animal that hasn't been killed in a gentle way. All of these things, being quite mindful about the actions that we do in our own lives. I would have to say, how do I live mindfully in my own life? It's a daily practice. I work very hard at present moment awareness, but being present to the extent that I breathe and appreciate my breath every day. Thank God for another breath in the morning. You know, we take it so for granted. And then I focus on my heart, and I thank my heart for beating this morning, that I get another day of life, you know, just down to the simple blessings in our lives that we totally take for granted. And then after I get through kind of physical body appreciation, then I really try and live every moment with love in my heart. And, you know, people are talking about what is our purpose in life, and what I've discovered as of late, my purpose in life is actually my present moment awareness, and how I'm going to be love in every moment with every person that I interact with in my entire life. It's not the occupation I'm going to have. It's not the house I'm going to live in. You know, what's my purpose? I think our purpose, really, if we come down to what is your greatest purpose, how you respond in every moment to every person, to any challenge. In that moment, what happens when we are pure love, right? What happens when we do that? What do you create to the person that you're expressing that to? And when you give love, you get love back. You know, imagine if we lived a life where instead of worrying about what we wanted in our lives, we actually turned it around and said, I'm going to give to somebody else what I want, right? I want love, and I don't have it. So I start giving love to other people. Well, what happens when you give love to other people? It comes back at you, right? It's amazing, you know? I was hearing a story of a lecture of a guy that went to one of my mentors to one of his retreats, and he came and he said, listen, I could barely pay to be here. I've got 36 cents in my pocket, and, you know, I've got nothing, literally nothing. And the teacher said to him, really, nothing? He said, nothing. And he said, well, do you have your sense of humor? He said, of course I have a sense of humor. Great. He said, well, do you have love in your heart? He said, sure, I have love in my heart. He said, you know, do you have intelligence? He said, sure, I'm here, of course, you know. He said, that's really wonderful. So over the next 4 days, I want you to give that to all the people here, because a lot of people don't have that. They actually don't have that. So, and those 36 cents, I want you to give a dime to 3 people. Just go to 3 people and explain where you're at and give them that dime. And see how you feel at the end of the 4 days. I mean, we are so capable in every moment of giving just so much of ourselves. You walk into the dry cleaners and I make a point, hey, how you doing? How's your day going? And what you leave that person with, or you get into a taxi cab and you put that cell phone down. Where are you from? Where are you from? Oh, you're from Israel? My mother's from Israel. No kidding. There's an opportunity in every moment to be love and to give. And what do you feel like as a person when you're giving? I mean, I don't know. How do you feel? I mean, when you can get to a place within yourself where you're a giver as opposed to a taker, how good do you feel when you have that composition to be a giver? I have my husband looking at me with beautiful eyes right here. I love you. It's not always easy, living mindfully. It's not always easy, but even in the hard, I try and find the good. Because the hard is there, because I'm about to learn something. And I just have one other thing that I was thinking about. Somebody was talking about, perfection in life. When a baby is born, you look at a baby, and it's perfect, right? Why is a baby so perfect? It has no needs. It's not asking for anything. It's not really needing very much. It's just perfect. And then we start growing up, and all of a sudden we think we need these things to be happy, or we need to acquire that to be happy. But the truth is, through certain practices, meditation, movement, eating right, perfect health, SBTI, eating so that your body can be in perfect health all the time, when you do these things, what you find is your happiness grows right here. It's inside you. And your fulfillment grows right here when you can balance yourself spiritually and physically. And then what happens is, this is what you have outside of yourself. That fulfillment is here in your partner. It's here in your work. It's here in your children. The opposite is misery. You have misery here, well, misery needs company. So the misery is here in your work, here in your partner, here in your work, right? So I guess that's a start to how I live my life mindfully, with love in my heart.
Does anyone like to offer some personal notes on how they might be able to share with us approaches and techniques to leading a mindful life in their own lives?
I'll give you this.
Hi. I found that when I was going through a very difficult time not so long ago, I turned to gratitude as a tool, and I knew about gratitude books, but I didn't have the time. I was sort of on the move. I had a lot going on, so to actually carve out extra time was a really big deal. So I kind of invented the gratitude walk. So while I walk through the trees, I sort of do a similar thing and thank everything. Really silly things like thanking the trees, and for my health and
on the trees,
everything. Yeah, and it actually sets the tone for the whole day. So I do that every morning.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, so there you go.
Anyone else have anything to offer?
Laibl, I believe you mentioned about in this video that it's important to give love to others ones. But very often what's happening, especially, for example, in husband and wife relationship or in any relationship, people give love, but it's counterproductive in a sense if they do not have self-love. And I'm not talking about selfishness. I'm talking about self-appreciation, self-understanding, knowing who you are, what you are. So if this foundation does not exist in a person's mind, basically a house built on the sand, and it's falling apart. It can last years and years, but eventually this person will fall apart and some crisis will come.
Yes. I think that the distinction that you drew between self-love and selfishness, which is an important distinction, I would perhaps paraphrase to avoid that confusion by talking about personal significance and self-worth. And I fully concur with you that people who lack that sense of personal significance and self-worth, find it very hard to enjoy a loving relationship and certainly to share love as such. And to assume a bedrock, axiomatic proposition of self-worth itself is an exercise. It doesn't just come automatically. It has to spring from somewhere. And it has to conclude that your contribution by the act of being alive is significant in a cosmic sense. In the Jewish spiritual tradition, we actually affirm that every single morning. When we wake up and we practice meditatively an affirmation called Modeh Ani, which in the course of that affirmation is the phrase Shechechezarta bi nishmati, which translates, you restored to me my personal identity, my personal significance. Who am I as a contributor to the world? Now, if you say that affirmation in a believing sense and you recognize 7 days a week, 365 days a year for 120 years, you should be able to get at it by then. And in so doing, it means that the loving relationship, spousal relationship, as the example you gave, should become strengthened on each day, because each day you're affirming your capacity as being able to contribute love. Just one more little thought, which wasn't latent in your question, but one which I'm very fond of sharing. We live in a democratic world, and we tend to apply concepts across the board. So we apply democracy to love. And the way we apply democracy to love is to say, well, love should be a two-way street. If I love you, you should love me. And that's simply not true. Love is not a two-way street. Love is a one-way street. What do I mean by that? Love is all about giving, not about receiving, and certainly not about taking. Why not receiving? Don't I deserve to be loved? I'm sure you deserve to be loved, but you don't love someone in order to be loved back. If you love someone because you want to be the receiver of love, that's called either blackmail or bribery. Love is simply what you can share and offer. Now, the Alter Rebbe often quotes Mishlei in his work, the Sefer Tanya, to say, as a face is reflected in water, so do we reflect each other. Meaning, if you love someone truly, yes, you will be loved back, but that's called bonus. Your job is to love. What you receive is a wonderful reward of that. But the expectation of that is ego.
And don't you find as well that you attract positive things when your attitudinal shift changes? You know, when you have difficult times, if you can actually see the glass as half full. You know, if we all just recognize we're exactly where we're meant to be at this moment in time in our lives. If you believe that God created all of us, then we're exactly where we're meant to be. So don't give yourself a hard time. Recognize something is difficult or challenging because it's an opportunity to raise your level of consciousness, right? There's something to be learned here. So you might witness the sensation and discomfort, but then, you know, okay, I'm open to it. This doesn't feel good, but let's get through it because I'm sure I'm going to feel great and be a lot smarter when I get to the other side. And the more you put your attention on the positive aspect of things, the more positive things come and flow.
Are there any thoughts or questions moving away from this immediate discussion that Jen and I are conversing in? Anything that arose through the dialogue that we had a few moments ago on screen?
Yeah.
Come forward if I can just add one little quick thing, Laibl. My own personal experience, for whatever it means, is that I really believe, I know the universe, the glue that holds us together is whatever we call it, it's love. I don't have a word that goes beyond that, transcends that, which has got a long time ago, my thinking about, we're all love. The glue that holds us together with all our, is love. So if I am love, and so are you, where does that put us? We're all the same now. The blue of the universe is within each of us. That's all.
What you're saying, Audrey,
Yes.
is that there is a common denominator in context of humanity or life as such. And all of us draw from that resource, and you're nominating it as love, which is actually very congruent to the Jewish spiritual beliefs. And I think most spiritual pathway beliefs have experientially come to the same conclusion, both whether it's a historical exercise or an intuitive exercise as such. If people were to ask me, as was said on screen, what is it that happiness is? And I said there that happiness is a journey. It's not the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, but happiness is the product of a loving stance. And I defined loving stance beyond mere attraction between two people. A loving stance means the act of giving and contribution because you want to give and contribute to someone else's welfare or the world's welfare, environmentally, etc. That's the glue. And the way that in the Kabbalistic and Hasidic tradition it's drawn out is to say that chesed, which means the outward flow of emotion in a giving posture, was the primary tool that God used to create the world. And therefore, when you and I plug in to that same posture, then we're on that wavelength, and therefore we experience that same phenomenon as creation is.
I would say that it's probably harder and harder to get there these days because the units of stress that we're putting into our nervous system with information overload, technology, movement, they say that the stimulus that we experience in one day, 200 years ago, people wouldn't experience that in an entire lifetime. It's extraordinary. It gives me chills, right? So we just continue to, it's like a brand new computer works really fast, and we add and download. Eventually it crashes and we have a nervous breakdown. And, they say if you're not doing something to upgrade this hardware or to get the stress out of your system, you actually are moving in a direction as you age, in a direction of lower states of consciousness. It's why people as they age become more impatient and more irritable and more angry and less happy, right? If you're actually doing something through meditation or movement or eating to your body type, which we can talk about as well, which is related to perfect health, that you can actually move in a direction of higher states of consciousness, and as you age, feel happier and more blissful. It's just something to be aware of. In terms of body types, what Deepak is famous for is not treating cancer patients just as numbers, but really understanding that we each have a particular body type. And if you read his book, Perfect Health, on page 33, you can take a little test and figure out what your body type is. Some people can have a double espresso before they go to bed at night. Doesn't make a difference. Somebody who's more of a vata composition, which is water and air, if they have one after 10 a.m., they're anxious throughout the day, right? People that are pitta, which are their composition is more fire inside, they like to feel balanced by cooling that fire. And so cold drinks, they love their ice cream, colder foods are better. A vata person is water and air, more flighty and needs movement to concentrate and things like that. Heavier foods are better for them. You might be eating a lot of salads to keep your figure nice. Actually, for a vata person, that actually makes them more anxious and more out of balance and gives you stomach issues. And when we talk about how 93% of diseases caused by inflammation are preventable through meditation practices, this is what they're talking about, ways to keep your body in perfect health. The other thing that I want to point out is a lot of studies that we're doing now has to do with your gut as being the other brain that Laibl was talking about. What you eat affects how your brain works. It's extraordinary, right? Mind and the body are infinitely connected. What you eat. So If you're not eating to your body type, or you're eating a lot of things that have toxins or whatever, it changes your moods, can bring on Alzheimer's, can affect Parkinson's and the symptoms of that. So it's just something to be aware of. Things that you can do for yourself, preventative medicine.
You reminded me of something I was reading recently. How many of you are familiar with the name of Otto von Warburg? Oh, there is one or two. Good. Okay. So, okay. A German Nobel Prize winner before the Second World War for evolving an approach or a theory of cancer which is quite different to what is the popular one today. Today we tend to be focused on the genetic theory of cancer, and what he had evolved was what's loosely called the metabolic theory approaching cancer. The main difference being that cancer, in his estimate, is contextual, meaning that cancer depends on the immediate environment within the body as such, which makes it conducive to have cancers rising or not, as opposed to a genetic predisposition. Now, we needn't go into the technicalities of that, but it has a very, very different concept as to how we function. And if we take, by the way, Otto von Warburg was born Jewish and moved away from Judaism because of some family settings. And interestingly, Hitler protected him during the war, although he was born Jewish, because Hitler had a fear of cancer. And he, being an expert in cancer, he wanted to make sure he's got an insurance policy of someone on the side that was there in case he was needed. That's an interesting little point. But when we talk about the metabolic or the contextual, what we're saying is, in the broadest sense, our body environment creates its own presentation of illness. And as we were saying before, mind and body means that it's not simply the body dynamics as such, whether it be the electrostatics, whether it be the neurotransmission, or whether it be the molecular notions of the flow within the body, but it extends beyond that into our, as I said, attitudinal responses. The way we think and the way we feel causes and flows down to the cellular level of the body. And then that goes beyond mind and emotion. It goes into belief systems, because the axiom that you adopt in life as your basic bedrock from which you spring from determines the way you think and determines the way you feel. And therefore, one's spiritual self is also part of that rubric that ultimately denotes what our body is and the way it behaves and how it conforms. And therefore, this notion of a total setting, contextual setting of our lives and the way we relate to it ultimately manifests in body illnesses. One last little point there. I just reminded myself something that the Lubavitcher Rebbe mentioned and said, why is there so much cancer as an illness in the world today? I know some people say that perhaps it always was the same, but we didn't detect it. But empirically, that's not so. The truth of the matter is there's proportionately much more cancer today than in the previous past. And he offered the following. What is cancer? Cancer is a good cell multiplying to such a point that the effect is no longer good. And that's really what it is. And that multiplication of the cell creates illness, which we call cancerous growths. He says the result is caused by our attitudinal response. We're living at a time where we want more and more and more and more, because in a disposable society, there's much more to take and acquire and to try to create a sense of personal security by acquisition, whatever that might be. And as our tendency becomes more and more and more and more, we suffer a malaise, spiritually, then emotionally, and then mentally, and then bodily. And that our bodies actually reveal the nature of the malaise in society, and it comes through and becomes us.
Consciousness creates our biology.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else have any other questions? Go ahead.
not sure how to phrase this, but there's just some thoughts that come through as you both were speaking, and it's about positivity and what that means in a real sense. And I meet a lot of people who read a lot of books about spiritual topics, and I find that they tend to sort of place a veneer of positivity across life experience, which sometimes isn't positive. And that, I guess the question is, how do you retain an overall positive sense but not deny the existence of the dark and the negative in the world, and also not cut off from other people's pain because that they've chosen a negative path? I just find there's a lot of using ideas of spirituality to actually cover up what's real experience, and to be able to sit with your own discomfort and handle other people's discomfort with this idea that, we just got to be positive and stay positive. It just comes across as quite fake to me. It's not my understanding of deep and real spirituality. So maybe you could just respond to that.
Well, I would start by saying just, the world is a projection of the state of consciousness of the viewer, right? How you see the world, what you're experiencing is your reality. So what you think, what you're experiencing, oftentimes you see somebody else, depending upon where you are, is how you're going to view that other person and make a lot of assumptions in the process. People that are having difficulty and are choosing to have a positive attitude, they're creating positive stress chemicals or good chemicals in their bodies, and will get out of that more quickly than people who put their attention on the negative. That'll create much more stress chemical in their body and will keep them there longer, right? We want to put our attention on the things that we want to grow in our lives. There's a great story, I don't know where it came from, where a guy comes out with a hose to water the garden, and he's holding the hose here and he's going, "Oh my God, look at those weeds." And he's staring at the weeds, and his water's going on the weeds. Anyway, he's all flustered. He goes back into the house. He comes back the next day, and the weeds have grown, and he's still watering the weeds. Oh my God, they're bigger now, right? So what you put your attention on, that's what's going to grow in your life. If you want to complain about the negative aspects that somebody has and your partner has, and you want to continue to put your attention on those negative aspects, well, that will be your reality. And if you can find the positive things that they are and their positive attributes, then that is what will grow. I always say to people, if that person has to change for you to be happy, you're going to be waiting a long time. Right? So the best thing to do is be the change you want to see around you. Work on yourself. Find a way to get that inner peace happening within you. Also, I say to people, you can spend 10 years in therapy, but if you're not coupling it with something to upgrade this nervous system, this hardware, it's going to take that much longer to change patterns of behavior. You have got to get rid of stress in your nervous system. We have hundreds and thousands of units of stress that are being triggered throughout your day constantly, right? Like a bag on your shoulders. And you expect with this tunnel vision to have good decision-making capability. It's just not possible. Get rid of the stress, either through movement, present moment awareness, mindfulness techniques, transcending techniques, meditation, even prayer. The more you put your awareness on the present moment, the more you will be authentic with yourself. You'll find more inner peace, and much more will flow to you. That's what I would say. Oh, you got one. You like yours?
Let me tackle it just a little differently, then we'll get to the question behind you. Pain is painful, and there's no turning away from it. And there's physical pain, and there's emotional pain, and it's terribly unpleasant. And if it becomes overbearing, we tend to be snowed under the pain. And we can tend to become negative if the pain continues. And that's all understandable. What is the nature of pain? I mean, what happened in Paris is very painful. And it's very, very hard to put a positive spin on something that happened in Paris or happens daily in Israel, etc. The nature of pain. What is pain? Pain means a dislocation, a separation, a disconnection. In a physical sense, it's the disconnection of the life flow through the body and the body itself. when the body becomes damaged, whether it be by a mere cut or something of malfunction of an organ or organic nature, we can feel it as pain. That's the experience that the human being has of the disconnection. When we're healthy, full of body integrity, it means that the neshama is flowing through the body optimally, ultimately connectedness. Translate that into an emotional plane. When someone very close to us hurts us or is absent from us, it means there is momentary disconnection. That disconnection registers emotionally, experientially, as loneliness or hurt, even anger, whatever might be the case. So in all instances of pain, it's always a disconnection of some kind. So we have a choice on how to respond to disconnection. So whether that be disconnection be a personal, physical one, so we seek therapy, we seek wisdom teachings that are able to close the gap in terms of our lives, whatever might be the case. That's okay, because we have a degree of control over ourselves. We control nothing else in the world except ourselves. So when the pain comes from an external source, like the bombings in Paris, which is the most contemporary one, and we sense that lack of control, we remain in a level of disconnection. And the only way we can connect to it is by allowing ourselves and affording us the confidence that I can do something to alleviate and to ameliorate that. But that requires now, the last point I want to make, it requires a belief system. Unless you believe, as was said earlier, that you are significant and what you do in your life does have a multiplier effect that affects others in the world, and we need a critical minimum fission process of certain number of people to radiate, whether it be goodness, positivity, exemplifying, etc., so it causes those waves, it may not happen. But if you desist from playing that role, then of course it won't happen. So each one of us has a power to alter and change the world. And I'm not saying that in an idealistic sense, I'm saying that in a very practical, spiritual sense. So whatever happens that is painful, whether it be within ourselves, whether it be outside of ourselves, we do have the mechanization to be able to create something much better. That requires a belief to adopt in order to be able to carry it out.
Yeah, and I would add to that as well. You know, if I ever have a situation where I'm feeling discomfort about somebody else, I always put the mirror back on myself. What is it? Why is it triggering something here? And am I not feeling love for that person? How do I get myself to a place to feel compassion for that person? You know, see them as a 12-year-old abandoned child, whatever it is. Find a way to offer something. When we're feeling negative, it's always about us.
There was a gentleman behind there who had his hand up. That is not a gentleman.
Is this on? Can you hear me? Okay. What I've tried over the last few years to practice mindfulness and peacefulness, how does one stop themselves being dragged back into human drama? Because I find that there's just such constant triggers around us, and I find it really hard to find the tools sometimes not to react in this, like the best way to react is clearly the mirror way, but there's all these other ways that we seem to react, and I just wanted to know some tools or ideas you have.
I find in my own life that since I started learning to meditate, it's kind of like a tree with roots. And the roots get stronger and stronger and stronger around me, to the point now where if I'm getting comments from people outside of me, I'm able to go, well, hold on a minute. And if they're not too nice, first I put the mirror back on myself. And then if I think, not so sure, I think this is their stuff, and I recognize that I'm learning about somebody else's state of consciousness, really having nothing to do with me. It's just information. So I can make a decision. Am I going to witness this behavior, or am I going to engage? Or do I have the adaptation energy to offer something good to them, right, from a good place? But when you have a lot of stress in your nervous system, your decision-making capability and your adaptation energy to be able to adapt to a challenge that is placed on you or respond to a challenge in an intuitive, creative, artful way, that's just not available when you're stressed, right? You just can't, right? When you're tired, you just don't make great decisions for yourself, right? But when you meditate and you recharge this nervous system and fill up your bowl of adaptation energy, right, and you're rested, you feel better. And you can actually handle it. And when, there are things going on around you and the dramas of the world going on around you, you have the space to say, am I going to witness or engage? It's like going to the movie theater. You get a front row seat. No perspective. It's horrible. You're right here. What do? You meditate. You move to the back row of the movie theater. This makes sense. I can handle this. And that's how it works for me.
Victim mentality. Being drawn into other people's dramas, which is what the tenor of your question was. No one can make you feel the way you don't want to feel unless you allow yourself. I'm going to say something quite provocative, and some people are going to walk away from this lecture remembering this one thing and not altogether positively.
Start recording.
I don't believe in emotional assault. I don't believe that anyone can assault you emotionally. Physically, yes. So why is it that so many people seem to suffer from emotional assault? And the reason is because they haven't learnt techniques and coping mechanisms to be independent and above the attempted assault. And they end up being privy to it and part of it, and therefore allow themselves to be assaulted. But that is something that they allow themselves, whether intentionally or unintentionally as such. You can't be drawn into other people's dramas negatively, hurtfully to you, unless you allow yourself. That doesn't mean to rise above and be oblivious to other people's pain. It doesn't mean to remove yourself even from a potentially painful situation. A lot of people say, well, just remove yourself. Yeah, that is a good coping mechanism. But the Jewish coping mechanism requires you to have also the responsibility of alleviating the other person's hurt and pain. And that's why I say often the response to other people's anger or other people's yelling at you, other people screaming at you, yes, you can walk away from it, and that's good. It's much better than yelling back at them and acting like a monkey and an ape, just copying them. But there's a better way. And the better way is the reframing, the new attitudinal response. They're yelling and screaming. It means that they are in pain. People don't yell and scream unless there's emotional pain or physical pain. What can I do to assist them? Now, I may not be able to assist them. In fact, it's rather egotistic of me to think that I can always assist everyone who's yelling at me. But on the other hand, by modelling that new attitudinal posture of being able to enter into it positively and doing something which is possible to help and alleviate, whether that be empathy, whether that be compassion, even if it's unsuccessful, it might be the 99th monkey that ultimately solves that person's problem, and I'm only number 23. But if I don't do my 23, there won't be a 24. So I have to do my bit. So don't enter into other people's dramas being drawn in. Enter into the drama with your personal significance, your self-worth, and your contribution. Whether it works or doesn't work is not your business. It's their business.
On that same note, Laibl, can you just give us a sense of how you might apply that approach to children?
the fact that your child is sitting next to you makes it a little difficult for me to respond, because I'm going to give away trade secrets to him that you...
I won't take it in.
Okay, he's going to block his ears. No, it's fine. You know, we're talking about parenting, aren't we? We're talking about a number of things. It's more specifically...
Well, I'll just perhaps frame it. I was also thinking about bullying in the school environment.
Yes. All right, then let me answer twofold, therefore. I was going to say that parenting is all about modelling and not about lecturing. Long after the child grows up and leaves the home, it's going to be your behavioural presentation that the child walks away with as an adult to a far greater extent. As political science statistics show, 87% of all kids vote like their parents did. Despite the period of very long hair or very short hair, or tattoos or non-tattoos, they'll end up being like you, the way you behave, the way you comport yourself, the way you treat people. When a potential to-be couples approach me and say, or how can I tell that he's the right one? So I usually say is, and it's not my creation, I read this, what you need to do is look at the way he responds to the garage attendant and to the waitress, because that's the way he's going to treat you in 10 years' time. And therefore, just make sure you understand what sort of person. Same in terms of parenting. The most number one thing is the way the mother and the father treats the stranger, treats the friend, treats the circumstance that arises that ultimately models the child. Your more specific question about bullying is, how do I allow my empathy for my child, which is the greatest empathy that can exist in a family context, and the helplessness that I possess in helping my child in that moment. So, the child is bullied, the child is upset by it, you feel that pain. Then it becomes complex. How do I handle my pain as a father in terms of the wisdom I need to impart to protect the child or to allow the child to have the coping mechanism? I can't give you a pat answer because it depends on the personality of the child and the personality of the parent as such. But at the end of the day, what the child seeks from the parent is the parent's absolute unconditional love. The fact that they're bullied usually means that there's sort of sense of lower self-esteem in their own right. If you can compensate as you would compensate as a father in context of the child, then that is the compensating factor, so that there's at least some emotional stability. And then, of course, the other mechanisms, whether you teach your child self-defense, which I do advocate, and whether you teach the child to have an inner understanding of what was happening in the mind of the bully at the time, which is not going to protect the child physically, but will help the child to have that sense of significance. Both of those are terribly important.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add one other thing. I think you were going to ask about how to present when raising children.
Slightly. The comment which Laibl was making in terms of emotional attack, something which I was actually going to follow up with, and in relation to children as well, whereas a child doesn't have the skill set of an adult to be able to cope with instances of bullying and emotional and a verbal assault. An adult does have that choice in terms of how he or she may respond.
I'm going to just pass you to my son for a minute, because he will be able to comment on that. Stand up for a minute, Noah. This is Noah. He's 10 years old, and he experienced... He's 11 now, sorry. Sorry, honey. Come over here. We have 5 children, so he's the oldest. I don't know their names, but I generally get their ages right. Noah experienced a bit of bullying in school recently, and we went through a whole kind of conversation about it. And Noah actually learned a way to handle it with humor. And he'll tell you what he started to do and how it changed the way people were treating him.
Well, I'd been given some advice about how I could just laugh about it and think, Well, say something, for example, if I was being told, for example, something rude, then I could just say something back to them, but not being rude in the way of laughing at it. So they could see that I wasn't taking it in as I was being hurt.
So what was the example?
Well, the example was,
What did the guy say to you where you said something like, is that all you've got? Is that the best you've got?
well, something like that, and then I'd say,
Hey, Ethan. Is that the best you've got?
and then I'd say, no, can't remember.
So how is your relationship with him now?
Well, now it's getting better. I think also I had been told about someone that what I've done is he's actually a good friend of mine now. And what you need to do is try and become friends with your enemies and the people in your life that aren't too nice to you. And if you can do that, it will make them they'll feel different. And it will make a change.
Oh. We didn't plan that. I just want to answer one thing, just so you can see me. In the way that we parent our children, okay, we're both meditators for 15 years, and it gives us that space when Deepak talks about stop, stop, think, observe, proceed. You actually have that space for that to happen. So let me give you a little example. One day we wanted to take all 5 kids scootering through the city of Melbourne, see the graffiti art, right? And one of our children came back after having had a sleepover and wasn't going to have a bar of it. Bad mood, temper tantrum, not coming, whatever. And as that was happening, this feeling of anger came up through my nervous system. And I'm thinking, God, I've been meditating a long time. Thought I got rid of all this feeling, you know. So the fight, flight, right? This anger comes up because I can't control the child. But I'm able to witness this response. And as I'm witnessing it, I'm like, oh, all right, am I going to witness this child or am I going to engage with this child? I have this space to have the conversation in my head. So I thought, just going to witness, don't want to give him attention for negative behavior, just look at him. So I went. And then I went and got all the other kids ready, got them in the car, came into the house, pressed the intercom on the phone and said, honey, we're leaving now. I suggest you get down into the car before the alarm goes on. And then he came down and got into the car huffing and puffing, and we drove off. And about an hour later, he came up to me and he said, you know what, Mom, I'm really sorry. I was just tired. Can we start over? I said, yes. And I always teach my kids, they can start over with me anytime and say sorry, right? But when you upgrade your nervous system so that you don't have to go into fight, flight, and you have that space to have that conversation in your head, am I going to witness or am I going to engage? You know, it makes a huge difference, and he does the therapy on his own. You don't have to do it with him, right? And he learns how to start over with somebody and so on and so forth and whatever. The other thing that I wanted to mention, I can't remember. It's gone.
Okay. Let's go for another 5-10 minutes maximum, because I know that you've been seated for quite some time in a chair, and stillness and non-movement are counter-conducive to human nature. Any other thoughts that you might want to discuss?
Yep.
Sorry.
Just making a shift a little bit to the corporate sector. So there's quite a big movement from a coaching perspective with senior executives and corporate leaders to have meaning and purpose. And that is part of their progress. And there's a lot of pressure around that. Have you got any tidbits in how to help people find their meaning and purpose when they're not in this sort of beautiful environment where you're sitting back and, you know, working like that?
I was lecturing some years ago to a Fortune 500 convention, And I had in the room about 40 of the leading CEOs of the automotive industry in the United States in the room. And we were talking about one's responsibility as a corporate leader to community at large. And I do agree with you, there's a far greater sense of sensitivity in terms of corporate responsibility, in terms of change of society and the like, and some very, very primary examples of that. At any rate, one of the discussions that arose was what creates, obviously, success in a company. And I threw out the proposition to this particular audience that their success wasn't so much the result of their wonderful public relations and marketing campaigns that they had, but their success was due to the result, as a result of the way that they treated their customer. The first point I made was that the customer who enters into the portals of the sales room, whatever may be the particular product, the attitude is this person is a gift to us, not just the customer. A gift in two ways. One, that customer has been sent to us to be a teacher, and at the very same time, we have an indebtedness that we have to share with our customer as such. So there's an attitudinal differentiation in terms of how I treat the people who I deal with commercially. And one of the things that America has become very, very good at, and I think it's being emulated in Australia, is customer service. Of course, it's being used also as a ploy because customer service does, in fact, create greater productivity. But how wonderful would it be if at the very same time of offering customer service, there was a belief system of the efficacy of treating another human being with nobility that fate has placed you in a relationship in. And it doesn't change the transactional setting, but it changes the whole atmosphere and flavour of the corporate world as such. So I'm just using that as an example to magnify the point that you're making. And since corporate leaders are in positions where they possess influence and are able to create change disproportionately to what most of us individually can, thereby lays a greater responsibility. And therefore, if they adopt the kind of teachings and practices and wisdoms that we've been speaking about tonight, I have no doubt that there'll be a real major multiplier effect in society as a whole.
How would you all like to learn a quick technique to get the stress out of your nervous system for the last 5 minutes? Yeah? Yeah? Okay, wonderful. I'm going to teach you very basic meditation. If you do this a few times a day, you're going to feel really great, okay? Let me just tell you a couple quick things. It is not physically possible to use thoughts or effort to clear your mind of thoughts. Everybody understand that? Anyone who has ever taught you meditation and told you clear your mind of thoughts, it is not physically possible to use thoughts or effort to clear your mind of thoughts, okay? Throw that idea right out the door. What they're referring to is through a particular technique, you can arrive at a quiet place, but you can't use effort to get there, and it's not a point of the exercise. It's just to know what it is if you happen to get there, okay? Agreed? Now, you all know how to meditate naturally. What happens when you read a book and you're tired? Your focal point are the words on the page, and you're reading. All of a sudden, you're off daydreaming with the fairies. Everyone had this experience before? Then what happens? You're off daydreaming, and there's a defining moment. You recognize you're off of your focal point, the words on the page. And you come back, reading. And this goes on and on and on and on, right? That process is meditation. We release stress, tension, and fatigue through daydreams. Put your technology down. Tell your children to put their technology down in the car. Let them look at the window and daydream. It is how we reboot. It is how we recharge. It is how you get stress out of your nervous system. So we're just going to give you an opportunity to daydream, okay? The focal point is going to be your breath. But before you put your attention on your breath, we're just going to close our eyes for a minute and daydream. I don't care if it's shopping lists. I don't care if it was the argument you have with somebody during the day. Whatever it is, we don't judge it. We don't try and push it away. We just witness it. Okay, everybody close your eyes for 1 minute. And just let your mind do whatever it wants to do. The hardest part is turning up and sitting in a chair and doing it. Just witness your thought for a minute. Whatever they are, we don't judge them. Just witness. Now, as you're observing those thoughts, I want you to use your breath as a focal point. This just means you put your awareness on your breath and you witness your breath flowing into your body and flowing out, but you do not change it. You're just witnessing it. This is just your focal point, which takes you to the next gear of getting stress out of your nervous system. Just a gentle awareness of your breath. Just witnessing it. That's it. And after you do this at some point, just like when you read and you get tired, you might wander off and catch yourself daydreaming. Shopping lists, things that you have to do for the day, picking up the children, the dry cleaning, the Vegemite shopping, the argument, whatever it is, we don't judge it. We just allow it to come. And then at some point when you recognize you're off your awareness of your breath, you gently come back. Not rushing, just gently putting your awareness back on your breath again. Not pushing thoughts away, just gently putting your awareness back on your breath. And then at some point you'll be off daydreaming again. And then you'll gently come back to that focal point, awareness on the breath. Let's do this for 2 more minutes. Okay, when you're ready, you can slowly open your eyes. Good? Pretty easy, right? Just show up. That's the hardest part. It's really easy to meditate. I'll be doing a monthly group meditation here, starting next year, I think. Was it next year, right?
February.
Starting in February next year. So you're welcome to come if you want to learn a little bit more. Okay.